Hello, this is Victoria Pendragon. Welcome to my alternate reality. Chapter 3. I'd like to talk today about a phenomena called walk-ins, just in case some of you don't know about it. A walk-in experience is, some people might call it a soul exchange, but in the complex that is the body, it is a soul-spirit exchange. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I am one, and I first realized that something was up when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I became determined that the birthday that my parents celebrated for me was not my birthday. I knew that my birthday was I guess earlier in the year, although technically speaking it was later in the next year because it occurred when I was 6 months old. Most people have had walk-in experiences as adults. In 1947, when mine happened, it wasn't happening all that much. But I knew something was up, and I would get out all my stuffed animals in May and celebrate my birthday properly, because that's when it was. And I knew that's when it was. And I didn't know why, but I knew what. So many years later, sometime, probably in the late 90s or the early 2000s, when I was in the midst of my healing practice and was performing something called remote depossessions on people, someone contacted me and sent me a picture in the mail because I worked from pictures. And I'll explain all that later. And I opened this envelope, which I used to do. I would open the envelope just to get a peek at the person and then put it right away because I didn't want to deal with the process immediately, but I did want to make sure the picture would work before I scheduled the actual event. And the picture that I saw, I took one look at it, shoved it back into the envelope immediately, and the sense I had was that I was looking at myself. Now, I wasn't going to look at the picture again because I did need to go deep into this person's psyche, and I didn't want to do that right then. When I finally did pull the picture out again, I looked at the picture and I thought, well, how on earth did I feel that? It was such a gut response and so fast and so passionate. The woman looked nothing like me. She was from a Scandinavian country and looked that, and I certainly don't. Then I did the work and discovered that, in fact, she too seemed to have some abuse issues in her childhood. And I thought, well, maybe that's what I was feeling, maybe that's what I was sensing. And I thought it curious that her abuse issues were rather similar to the ones that I had experienced, some of them. I called her up, read her the report, told her the work was done, and she said to me, I need to see you. And I was a little hesitant, especially with what I had been feeling, but I said, well, all right, we can meet. And we set up a time to meet. And she told me, she said, I don't understand why I feel this need to meet you, but it has something, I keep getting the word shape-shifting. And I thought, okay, whatever. So we met and hit it off right away, and we became friends. And sometime after we were friends, she came walking into my house one day with a rolled-up newsletter, and she said, this is for you. It's the Walk-Ins newsletter. And I said, well, what's a walk-in? And she said, well, that's a person that has experienced a moment or a period of unconsciousness or seriously altered consciousness, during which time their soul leaves the body and another one comes in. And I just sat up and I said, I'm one of those. And she looked at me and smiled and she said, I know. Well, I don't know how she knew, but she claimed to know. Now, I knew it because of the birthday phenomena. I always knew that something was up. And I thought, this is confirming to me. Well, sometime later, perhaps 6 months or so later, I was doing some transformational breath work with a rebirther, and I experienced coming into the body, actually. It was as though I were kind of propelled down a cosmic chute into my body, as opposed to being born. And as I was coming in, I saw her leaving. And I thought, that's how she knows. She was in here first. And that's why she felt compelled to meet me. And I took the information back and I told her, and she had the same kind of knowing response. She grasped it. And then I thought about the fact that her abuse issues had been rather similar to my own, except mine much more intense and demanding. And I figured that perhaps her soul, I don't know, had second thoughts and, gave a holler and said, can we work this out? And I probably said, sure, just my kind of thing, since I'm all about experience. And I probably, at a spirit level, probably didn't want to turn that chance down. Heaven knows at a human level, one thinks differently about these things. But that's essentially what a walk-in experience is. Now, people have these when they get seriously ill, perhaps unto death, and then seem to come back again. Doesn't happen to everybody, of course. And people can have them in automobile accidents if they're rendered unconscious. It is nowadays far more common than it was when I was young. I don't know why that is, but it is. And what happens to people when it happens to them when they're older is that they change. And people sort of don't recognize them, because these are people that had fully developed personalities. I, of course, did not. I was very young when it happened, 6 months of old. Now, the interesting thing is, I discovered through my daughter, who was interviewing my mother, that when my mother came to pick me up from the hospital, where I was lodged when this happened, I had tuberculosis. And most infants who had tuberculosis at that time would die. And I was being used as a guinea pig for medical experiments, which happily, the thing they tested on me worked. When my mother came to pick me up from the hospital, because she herself had tuberculosis also, I had contracted it from her, and she was elsewhere in another, what do they call them? Sanatorium. The nurses handed me to her, and she looked at them and said, "That's not my baby." And she insisted that I was not her baby. And they had to do a great deal of convincing and bring my father in, who had visited me while in the hospital, to get her to believe that I was, in fact, her baby. So at that maternal gut level, she felt the shift. And what wasn't about to have me back. But happily she did. So for me, and except for my mother, it wasn't dramatic at all. Nobody else had, of course, the kind of connection to me that she had. But other people who are out in the world, and people who are married, can get divorced over this, because it is as though they have become someone else. And it is called a walk-in. You can find that any number of places online. There's a group called Walk-ins for Evolution that has a good deal of very good information if, for instance, you might suspect that such a thing had happened to you or someone that you know. It's an interesting prospect to present to someone, to say, maybe this happened to you. So be cautious about that, because, well, it's an alternate reality thing. So that's walk-ins, and that's it for today. And I keep forgetting to mention my website, which is my name, victoriapendragon.com, if you're interested. Thanks for listening. Bye.